When I was a family pastor, it was right before we had our first daughter. I was a student pastor to start and then became a family pastor. And as a student pastor, I would work at the church I was working at. I would do a lot of stuff with them. And I would get there early and set things up. And what always happens in church was happening for us. We would start at 10:30, whatever time it was, and barely anybody would be there. And then by 10:45, 10:50 is when most people come up to service. And a lot of times it was families. It was people with kids that they had kids and they got there, but they got there really late. And I remember as a 20-some-year-old, no kids of my own, thinking and being like, why can't parents just be here on time with their kids? Like, it's not hard. Just do it. Because, I know I don't have any kids, but I just assume just wake up a little earlier. And then we had our first daughter, and then we had our second daughter, and then my wife was getting there pretty close to on time, but still, that's still my mentality. Like, why can't other families get here earlier? Why can't they do that? And then for a year, I was not working at a church. I was working for Impact for free, raising money, doing those kind of things. So on Sundays, I was either visiting another church to talk about what we're doing here at Impact, or I was just going to church. And I remember that first Sunday with 3 kids at this point, being excited. Oh, I actually get to bring my family to church, because normally I don't. Normally Eric has to bring all of them, and I'm already here. So I think I'm excited. I'm actually get to bring them to church. And I got up early, and we got everything ready, and it's not hard to get here at 10:30, right? We got there at 10:45. It was the most stressful morning I've ever had in my life. But to me, it was like, yeah, but that's because my kids are different than all your kids. My kids are a little harder. I have 3 of them. So I had all these excuses for me. And you know what that's called? There's actually a word for that. It's a fundamental attribution error. That's what that's called. When we put whatever someone else is doing, their things that they're doing, we think that's because they are this. But when it's our turn, it's like, no, I have excuses for this. Here's what a fundamental attribution error is. It's a cognitive bias that causes us to attribute people's behavior to their character. He acts like that because that's who he really is, and that's what he really thinks. She did that because that's who she is on the inside. But then when it comes to our behavior, we understand that there's other factors. Now, for me, I don't do that, because if you knew my circumstances, if you knew what was going on in my life, all of my environment, my circumstances, it would be different. When they do it, it's because that's who they are. When I do it, there's a lot of other reasons why I do it. And here's some examples for that. There's that guy who is always late. And he's always late in your mind because he's lazy, because he doesn't care about you, because he's irresponsible, whatever reasons. But when I'm late, it's because I'm helping my kids and I have a lot of stuff to do, and I'm actually so responsible that I have so much to do in the morning. That's why I'm late. He's late because he is a bad person. I'm late because of what's going on. I didn't like what she said. She said that and it was rude, and that's because she is rude and she is selfish, and that's who she is. But when I said it, I'm just honest. I didn't mean to say it that way. There's so many things going on. I didn't sleep last night. We always have an excuse. That is a fundamental attribution bias. And that happens when we assume someone's behavior reflects what kind of person they are. But for us, it's our social and environmental factors. So we don't look at it the same way. And when it comes to politics, we all do this. Here's what it sounds like for us. Liberals, they're PC, they're all about animal rights, they're fake, they're always pushing that liberal agenda, they always think that they know better than everybody else, always telling people what they need to think. You might believe that because you're conservative. But if you're a liberal, you'd say, that's not who I am. No, we're about being open to things outside of ourselves, having our eyes open and thinking about others, being aware of our planet is precious, and we need to be responsible for that. That a diverse community is a strong community, and sometimes the little guy needs a hand, and we are a strong enough country to help them do that. All depends on what you believe. It's a fundamental attribution bias. Let's go the other way. Conservatives are just super religious. They're racist even though they don't think that they're racist. They only care about money, and they think everyone has to follow their own conservative Christian ideas. You might think that because you're not a conservative. But if you're a conservative, you would say, that's not who we are. No, we're all about values and defending what is right and respecting this country that we came from, and that country and God and life, they are sacred things, and that people should respect each other, and the government is there just to facilitate, but the government is not there to control people, and that the way you get the best out of people is by making room for their strengths and not overcompensating for their weakness. It all depends on what you believe, right? That's a fundamental attribution error. But like we said last week, and if you've been listening to what we've been talking about, like we've already said, We don't fall for that trap. We aren't willing to do that because we understand that where somebody sits is where they stand. We understand that where they came from, how they grew up, what their circumstances were, help make them who they are today and have those beliefs that even if you don't agree with those beliefs, you understand that where they came from makes them stand for certain things. So you're not willing to fall for that trap because you understand the political rhetoric is a way to push fear on us and that we know that we are not going to let these silly things that aren't actually true define other people in our lives because we believe in a Savior. We're not willing to do that, right? Some of us aren't. Some of us still have trouble with this, right? So in this series, we've been talking about how we need to be one no matter what we believe. That yes, we can disagree politically, and yes, we're going to disagree politically, but we still love unconditionally. That we need to do that, and that if we want to influence many people, we have to love others first, put people first, politics second. We believe politics are important. We believe you should have stances. We should believe you should vote. We believe all those things, but we need to put people first. And in order to do that, like we talked about last week, we need to listen to people we don't necessarily agree with, learn from them, even if we don't change our opinion, and love them. And ultimately, the only way we can accomplish oneness in politics is by looking at our politics through a filter of faith, and not our faith through a filter of politics. Instead of allowing our party to influence our faith in Jesus, we will allow Jesus to influence our party. That's what we have decided throughout this series. That when forced to choose the better of two evils, you still have to call out the evil. When forced to choose between the imperfect candidates and the imperfect platforms, you still have to call out the imperfections. That's what we believe. And why is this important? Because no one else is going to do this. We as followers of Jesus who put our faith as our number one priority, or at least we should, we have to be the example. If we want this country and this world to be unified, we have to be the example. Then we are the ones that are under Jesus' authority. And when we know that when we start to put our faith first, we will begin to influence the culture and the morality and the ethics that are happening. And here's why I know that's going to happen. And eventually, we can influence the systems of our world. And I know that because it happened. The early Christians respected the authority of Rome. They honored them, but they didn't allow them to be number one. And if things happened that put a gap between their faith and what the Roman Empire said, no matter what it cost them, they were willing to do what they knew they had to do, whether it was a threat of their lives, whether they were going to be in prison, they didn't care. They would respect and honor Rome, but they wouldn't do it at sacrificing their own faith. And because that happened, we have seen the world change. In a time where you were only important if you had a lot of stuff, or whoever you owned, and it was all about getting on top, and it was all about having the most stuff and having the status. In a time period like that in the first century, the early church united with the idea that God called them to love everyone and spread the news of the gospel to all, no matter the cost. This wasn't happening at a time where the Roman Empire was just saying, okay, Christians, you go do your thing, we're going to do our thing, we'll be fine. They were spreading this message while the Roman Empire was saying, if you keep doing that, we are going to kill you. If you keep doing that, we're going to put you in prison. And the early church said, but we're going to keep doing it because we saw Jesus die and come back like 3 days later. I don't care if you threaten us with our lives because we know that death isn't the end for us. So we're going to keep pushing the message. And the empire was like trying to figure out ways to stop them. They would impose sanctions. They told the church that, okay, listen, you can still worship God, but you also have to at least admit that Caesar is Lord too. If you admit that, then we'll leave you alone. They go, no, Caesar's not Lord. We're not going to admit that. The empire kept trying to do that. But these Christians just kept joining together. They kept worshiping this new Lord, this Jesus, this rabbi, no matter what the empire threatened them with. And they weren't just people worshiping together. They weren't just Jews worshiping together that had a tradition. They were a diverse, different group of people that joined together despite their differences to worship the risen Savior. Now, all of a sudden, Paul is preaching about unity, and we talked about this verse, but we're really going to break this verse down in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. Here's what Paul says. He says, there is neither Jew nor Gentile. Jew or Gentile. This is a big distinction. There's neither Jew nor Gentile, because the Jewish people be like, no, here's the thing. I'm not hanging out with the Gentile people. I've been taught my whole life. My grandparents told me they are dirty people. I can't even go into their house. Are you kidding me? I'm not hanging out with Gentiles. No, I don't want their Gentile cooties all over me. I'm not hanging out with Gentiles. The Gentiles would be like, I'm not hanging with Jews because they treated me like I was nothing forever. They treat me like lesser than. They always act like they're better than me. Why would I hang out with them? But Paul says, no. This is a new game now. There's neither Jew or Gentile. We're together. Then he continues on. There's neither slave nor free. Now this is weird because there's a difference between slaves and free in this culture. Neither slave nor free. No. Some people are born to be ruled. Some people are born to rule. There is a difference. And Paul says, no, not in this kingdom. In this kingdom, God views both slave and free with the exact same value and dignity. In a culture where slaves did not have any value and there was no dignity for them. In the entire kingdom and culture, of course there were slaves. But this idea was a countercultural, this was brand new. The idea that everyone, no matter their status, no matter what they did, was equal, was unheard of in the Roman Empire. But Paul said, nope, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave or free, there's no difference either. Then he continues on. This one's probably the worst one. There's neither male or female. Hold on. There's a difference between male and female? Hold on. Not in this culture. In this culture, they are not the same. Men own women. Women are just property. That's all they are. Their only job is to give me a boy. And if they don't do that, I can divorce them for any reason. It doesn't matter. If I'm just tired, if I don't like her cooking, I'm just going to divorce her. That's what would happen in this culture. And then if you were a divorced woman, you had no shot. You were done in this culture. The best thing you could be is a slave. That's the best thing when you were a divorced woman. But Paul says, no, not in this kingdom. Man and female, equal. We see them the same. No, it's exactly the same. In this kingdom, women have just as much value as men do. And nowadays we hear that, we go, yeah, this is, okay, we get it. But no, not back then. Back then, this was unheard of. In fact, Paul also writes about a verse that you might know that actually gets a bad rap. Women submit to men. Have you ever heard that verse? Wives submit to your husbands. A lot of people are like, I don't like that verse. And I agree if that was the only verse. But if the verse before it says that they should mutually submit to each other, that's what Paul said, which is unheard of. Back then, of course, a wife had to submit to a husband or she'll go to jail or be killed. But men didn't have to submit. And Paul said, no, you're submitting. You're equal value. God sees both of you the same. You both are equal. Not only do women have value, but they are your equal. And then he says, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for all are all one in Christ Jesus. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. All people have equal value in this new kingdom. All people have equal dignity in this new kingdom. This was revolutionary. This didn't make sense in this culture. It doesn't make sense. And the empire knew that if this caught on, this idea that everyone had equal value and deserved equal rights and everyone had equal dignity, if this idea caught on, it would unravel the empire. It would be the end for the empire. They knew it, so they had to stop it. So they decide, okay, we got to figure out a way to stop this. So anybody thinks, how are we going to stop this? We need to figure this out. Let's stop their big hitters. So they decide, okay, Paul and Peter, we got to get rid of them. And they do. They execute Peter, they execute Paul. But then 45 years go by after Peter and Paul, the big examples, the people that are spreading this message everywhere. 45 years after they have been crucified, the church is not only still going, it's still growing without them. And the empire's looking like, but we got rid of their big people. We got rid of the biggest hitters they had, and it's still moving and growing. What is happening? So they're trying to figure out what to do. And so Pliny the Younger, who was a governor of the area that we would now know as modern-day Turkey, he starts to think of ways that he can stop the spread of this movement called the Way. That's what this movement was called, what we know as Christianity. How are we going to do this? The Roman Empire is starting to come undone, and because this message is starting to spread more and more, and this church is growing more and more. And they come to the conclusion that the reason why the empire is suffering is because the gods, because they had lots of gods, they're angry, and they're attacking us. And the reason why they're angry is because these Christians keep moving this movement, and the gods are mad about it. So we got to take care and figure out something with these Christians. So the empire creates an edict. And they don't want to necessarily stop the Christians from worshiping because they've decided, we can't stop them from doing it. We know that's done. They're going to do it either way. They know they can't stop them. But if at least they can swear allegiance to the empire, then maybe the gods will be happy and Rome will be fine. So they start to think of these plans. So Pliny the Younger, before he enforces this new edict that has been set by the empire, he decides he's going to do some investigation. He's going to really see why this Nazarene cult is changing everything and why they're so dangerous and why we have to stop them. So he decides, I'm going to investigate. I'm going to do some work. So he sends out spies, and these spies gather up some of these Christians and they rough them up and find out what they're doing. And here's what he learns. After investigation, he writes a letter with his findings to Emperor Trajan. And if it was just today and he was doing this, he would do something like, I don't know, like a podcast probably with all of his investigation of years that would be sponsored by HelloFresh. That's what he would do. But back then, it was a letter, okay? And here's what he says in his letter. To the emperor. He says, the sum and substance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn. So let me explain what's going on. He says these Christians, they all used to meet on a Saturday, these Jewish people. And then somehow it changed to a Sunday. In history, we see that. Jews used to meet on a Saturday, and then for some reason they started switching to a Sunday. And I'm not sure what other reason it would be besides they saw Jesus die and Jesus came back to life 3 days later and said, well, I guess we're switching our day because that's Resurrection Day now. We're going to do it on Sunday. I don't know what other reason there would be. But this is weird back then because Sunday was a work day. It wasn't like it was their day off. So that would be like if we changed church service and said, hey, it used to be 10:30 on Sunday. We're going to do it on Mondays at 5:30 a.m. We would love to see you guys there. None of you would be there. Frank would quit. He wouldn't be there. Like most of us would not be there, right? Like we wouldn't be able to do that. But no, this is when they're worshiping. Their fixed day is a day before work at 5:30 before the sun comes up. He continues on. And they sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to a God. So they sing these hymns together, and back then there wasn't much for them to read. The Bible wasn't, there was some of the Torah, but there's not these letters that Paul wrote at this point, and a lot of them couldn't even read anyway. So what they would do is they would sing these hymns so that they could learn about their faith. They would learn about theology through their songs. They would learn about Jesus through the way that they sang, and they would sing to Jesus, this rabbi who was crucified that they believe is still alive. I mean, think about that for us today. Back then, they would meet on a Monday morning at 5:30 a.m. and sing loudly because they were learning and praising God. I know sometimes we do songs you don't want to do, right? So what do? Now we have masks, we don't even have to pretend to sing, right? We can just kind of leave it there and do it. But no, they would sing loudly because they were learning more about God through their songs. And then Pliny keeps going. He says, and to bind themselves by oath. So this is where it's got to be the dangerous part. So, okay, they meet, that's fine. They're allowed to meet. They sing songs, okay, whatever. I mean, COVID's not happening then, so they're fine. They can sing. But an oath, this is where it's going to get dangerous. This is probably why these Christians are so dangerous. This is why we have to stop them. They got to have an oath that is calling for a slave revolt or something. They got to have an oath that is trying to go against and undermine the empire. So what is this oath that every week, after they would sing and meet together, they would promise to each other? Here's what Pliny discovered. The oath to themselves would be this. The oath was not to some crime, but not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, not falsify their trust, nor to refuse to return a trust when called upon to do so. So Pliny the Younger, who's not a Christian, who doesn't believe in this stuff, is discovering that this group of people, these people that are so dangerous to the empire, they are making an oath that's helpful to the rest of society. This didn't make sense. See, back then in pagan religions, there were no morals. That wasn't a thing. There were no values or virtues. You didn't have to make an oath. There were civil laws that you had to obey, sure, but when it came to religion, the only thing the gods wanted was your sacrifice. You can treat anyone however you want it, but we need your blood sacrifice and your grain offering. After that, do what you want to do with everything else. But no, this cult that Pliny is discovering is committing to moral and ethical standard that not only is not helpful, it's putting them at a disadvantage in this culture. Like when you follow these things, when you say, I'm not going to steal from anybody, I'm not going to commit adultery, when I tell somebody something, I'm going to be a man of my word, when we do that, that's putting you at a disadvantage in a culture that doesn't care about any of that stuff. That's what he's discovering. Imagine if we did this. Imagine if we met together and then at the end we all had to raise our hand. All right, let's take our solemn oath. I swear not to steal from anybody. I swear not to post anything stupid on social media that's going to look bad on the church. I swear not to murder this week. Imagine we had to do that. That's what they're doing every week. They are making an oath. This is what I'm going to do. Pliny the Younger, who was not a Christian, who did not believe in Jesus, wrote after his investigation that he found this group who was supposedly angering the gods because they were so kind to everybody. It didn't make any sense. The culture found it appalling. Why would you worship a crucified rabbi? But then others started to find it appealing. Wait, these Christians, they just go and help sick people? That's what they do? Wait, they find babies that are being left out and they bring them into their own home and adopt them like they're their own? Wait, they treat slaves and poor people with the same dignity and value that they want? Wait, they elevate women into a position of leadership in the church? All of a sudden, what started off as appalling because it was so countercultural became appealing. Then what became appealing eventually became contagious. And then before you know it, what was once some odd Nazarene cult that worshiped some crucified rabbi that had no political power, that had no political army, that had no military, had no authority, they took this message, love God, and love others, and they used that message to spread it so far that it formed Western civilization. We are still seeing the byproduct of what they did, and we are still part of that story, and we are still part of that movement, which is why we cannot become separated over political beliefs or over political lines, all of which could change for you, and all of which one day will be over. We cannot be separated by it. If the Christians in the 1st and 2nd century were able to live in a world so different and so dangerous to their belief, if they were able to find common ground at the foot of the cross, there's no excuse for you and me. There's no reason we can't do it too. Now, I know some of the problem with this type of message, and we're closing out this series, and so I promise I'm not going to talk about politics again for a while after this. But I know some of the problems with a series like this, and from what I've heard from people and what some of the things I've heard, like, haven't heard really any negative stuff. In fact, some of you are like fairly relieved that I didn't offend you too much. I heard that a couple today, like, man, I thought it was going to be a disaster, but it turned out to be okay, which I'll take that for every sermon. I thought it was going to be a disaster, but it turned out to be fine. But there's two things that I think that we're still kind of wrestling with when it comes to this idea of unity and oneness, specifically with our politics. There's two ideas, two problems. Here's the first one that I've been hearing. We can be divided over some very important issues, right? There are some things that you believe, there are some things that I believe that are important. And we can be divided over things that are very crucial. That isn't just always just a political party we follow. It isn't always just a political belief we have. For some of us, and for most of us, I would say, we have one or two things that are like, this is crucial to me. And so for some of us, we cannot comprehend how in the world someone could say they follow Jesus but still believe that. Or how someone could say they follow Jesus and not believe this. Because it's so crucial to us. I get it. There are some important issues that we need to understand and we can be divided over. And some of us, it's like, you call yourself a Christian and you believe that? You call yourself a Christian and you voted against that? And I get it. I understand that you may never understand why other Christians don't see political issues and social issues the way you do. I get it. I understand that. There are some issues to me that are very important for me, and I have trouble with that. That is why it is so important for you to vote. That's why you have to. Because when you vote, your informed conscience, like we've been talking about, you don't vote to make people happy. You vote what you know the Spirit is calling you to vote for. Because we understand there are some important issues that we have to do. But like we said last week, even when we disagree completely with somebody, we are still called to carry their burdens. That's what Paul called us to do. And when we do, we understand where people are coming from. And you may never agree politically with that person, but you can love unconditionally because you know where they came from. You understand where they sit and why they stand. And when you carry each other's burdens, we do what we're called to do, fulfill the law of Christ, to love God, to love others. Here's how Andy Stanley, who we've been doing this series, we've been using his example for our series. Here's how he said, I like the way he said it, so I'm just going to read it to you. It says, you do not have to understand me or agree with me to love me. And I don't have to agree with you or even understand why you view things the way that you do in order for me to love you. So our first problem is there's some big issues, and I get it. For some of us, here's our second problem that we might have with this series. This all sounds great. Great, I love this idea. I'm all for unity. We need unity and oneness. I agree with you, Eric. But it's impossible. It's just simply not going to happen. There's just no way in this culture that we will ever be unified. It's not possible. Good luck. It's like world peace. Yeah, I would love world peace. It's just not possible. It's not going to happen. So this is a great idea. Oneness, I agree. This is great, but it's just impossible. And you know what? When I watch the news, I'm like you. I believe, this is impossible. It gets worse and worse every week. We get more and more divided every week. When I watch the news, I agree, it's impossible. But when I read my Bible, all of a sudden the things that are impossible aren't as impossible anymore. We've been doing this theme song, which it's the first song we normally play, so some of you maybe haven't heard it yet. It's called Rattle. And I've heard a lot of people have got a lot of good comments about the song, but a lot of people are like, yeah, I like the song a lot. I don't know why we're doing it for politics. It has nothing to do with politics. And in fact, there's a line in this song that I've heard people ask me, I don't even know what that means. In the chorus it says, this is the sound of dry bones rattling. People ashy? What are you talking about? What are we talking about here? So let me explain to you what this means before we close with this song and close this series out with this song. Ezekiel Chapter 37, there's a story that you may know, you may not know. And we see Ezekiel and we see something amazing happen in Ezekiel Chapter 37, starting in verse 1. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and sent me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones in the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. If you're like me, you're really good at describing the bones, how dry they are, how impossible it is. You're really good at doing that. Here's the problem with our political system. Here's the problem with our candidates. Here's the problem with the whole system itself. Here's the problem with the division. It's the media. It's the social media. We have all these reasons, and we can talk about those all day long. We can. We can describe those all day long. But in the middle of the valley, God didn't call Ezekiel to describe the dry bones. He called him to declare what the Lord has said and watch what happens. We see that a lot in the Bible. Moses, lift your staff and watch the sea part. David, throw that rock at that giant and watch what happens. Disciples, I am going to die, but come to the grave because I'm going to be back 3 days later and watch what happens. And I command, the Lord commands that you stay one. He said, take this message to these disciples and spread it to all nations, to make disciples of all nations. Do you know how impossible it was for a little group with no military, with no power, with a message that actually hurt who they were in their culture? You know how hard it was for that little group to overthrow an empire? Impossible. It's easier for dry bones to come back together than that to happen. The Roman Empire is done. And the church is still here. And long after our politics, long after we're gone, the church will still be moving. It seems impossible. I agree with you. It seems impossible for us to be unified and oneness. It seems impossible. We follow a God who always makes the impossible possible. We see that happening. We've seen it in our history. So here's how we're going to close. I'm actually asked the worship team to come on up. To me, there's no better way to close a series about politics and a series about oneness than with communion. So I'm going to ask my dad to start passing out some of the communion elements. This is a way for us to reflect on the death and resurrection of Jesus. The thing that we're all unified by. This is our number one priority. This is what our number one stance. That we are unified by the death of Jesus. And that at the foot of the cross is where we go to be unified. That even when we disagree politically, man, we are unified by our belief in him. So I want to encourage everyone to go ahead and take your elements. You don't have to be a member of this church in order to take communion with us. All we ask is that you be a follower of Jesus. And if you're here and you're like, I'm not sure if that's me, this is your opportunity. This can be your step and this can be your process to do that. So I want to encourage everybody to take that. We will take it together. And on these things, just so you know, there's the bread and the juice of both. You guys can start opening them now because it takes a minute. Everybody a second. The last time we did this, I did not instruct anybody. I had trouble figuring it out. But again, I want to remind you why we are doing this. This is a way for us to reflect on the sacrifice Jesus made. That this is a representation of that. And we are unified by this. Jesus said that this was my body broken for you. When you eat, do this in remembrance of me. He said, this, my blood, was poured out for you. When you drink, do this in remembrance of me. Dear God, we praise your name. We cry out to you. We know that you are the God that does impossible. The things that seem like will never happen, through you, we know it can happen. Thank you for doing the impossible in our lives, saving us from ourselves, saving us from our own sins. Thank you for coming to us, dying on a cross, so that we can spend eternity with you. God, we want to leave here today remembering that you are the God that brings dry bones back, brings dead people back to life, and that can unify a culture and a world through us. Dear God, I pray as we leave here, as we go about our week, as we continue to think about politics and deal with politics, that you remind us and help us keep it fresh in our mind. We need to put people first, your message first, you first, over everything else. Help us to love you and love others, so that even when we disagree, we are unified in one the way you commanded us to be. Thank you for doing the impossible in our lives. In your son's name, amen. We're going to sing this song that we've been doing this entire series together, so I encourage you to stand and sing with us.